Thank you. So, Paulo Coelho has written a collection of essays. I don't know if many of you know of him, but he's a celebrated Brazilian author. And he has written this collection of essays titled Manual of the Warrior of Light. And the collection of essays is structured a series of directives, a hypothetical warrior of light faces, and these directives are accompanied by explanations. The book contains many paradoxes, and I've just shown two directives from the novel. Sometimes warrior of light behaves like a rock. At the same time, he has also qualities of water. And yeah, sure. I haven't done this before, so it might not work. These directives are conflicting, as I said, and it's very hard to apply them. Water and rock are given opposite, as opposite metaphors in Taoism. For instance, rock is stronger than water, or is it water is weak, but on a certain time scale, its power is absolute. And as my music teacher used to say, it's not the water that wears the stone, it's water plus frequency of falling. And so when I was reading these essays, I get very excited if there was something like that only for a computer programmer. So it's a set of rules to follow, and it's very hard to apply this manual because of the paradoxes. And this is why it's hard to become aware of light, is because you need to strike just the right balance sometimes, and this is where the skill lies. And so we find this balance of forces in many places in real life and in games, evolution, computing. And the forces at play in poker, for instance, is value-based and deceptive play. Those who play poker know that if players of equal skill meet and play for value on long enough time scale, no one will make any money. And the true game of poker lies in alternating between value-based and deceptive play, just right, knowing the opponent, and that's what game of poker is all about. As far as board game Go is concerned, the forces at play here are offense and defense. So the purpose, the point of the game is to capture territory, and the amount of territory you seek should be adjusted to your skill level and skill level of your opponent. Because if you are too ambitious, you will not have the strength to defend the territories. And if you are too conservative, you will not have enough territory to win. And so this, I hope I convinced you, there is a recurring pattern here. And I'm going to discuss what are the forces at play in computing. So, in computer sciences, with many other fields, there are problems to solve, and there is more than one way of solving a problem usually. And if we consider the whole hypothetical space of problems, I'll do this first, but hypothetical space, and the solutions are points in this multi-dimensional space. It's useful to do projections and on certain dimensions that we value, and the dimensions are that are to use are readable and cryptic, and then flexible and rigid, and simple and complex. And most of the time we want to stay towards one end of these, so we prefer more readable solutions, we prefer more flexible and simpler solutions, but sometimes we just want to strike the right balance between the two, and the values are, this is taken from Ken Beck, Mark's book on implementation patterns, where he writes that communication, flexibility, and simplicity are the cornerstones in the foundation of any good programming pattern. And by communication, he means here how well your code reads. Flexible solutions are easier to morph into slightly different ones as new requirements come in, and simpler solutions are easier to maintain. So as Alex Martelli said in his keynote on Monday, it's very frequently carefully navigating between two extremes, but sometimes it's slightly blurred, this area, and there are more possibilities. So to my mind, these are all simplicities in disguise, and the flexibility is just simplicity of adapting the system to future needs, and communication is simplicity of learning how the system works. And we're going to, if we go further and look at Eric Raymond's Unix philosophy, a series of design rules, and there is a non-exhaustive list here, but if you look at each and single one of them closely, you'll see that they're all recipes how to, given the situation, arrive at the most simple solution possible. And like rule of modularity teaches us to build our systems out of small components with clean interfaces connecting them, and clarity is a communication. Composition is a rule of modularity applied at program level. Teaches us to write programs that work well with other programs via textual interfaces. And simplicity has been discussed. The rule of separation teaches us to place different sections of our code that evolve in different timescales into different places, so that the code that evolves on the same timescale is local in code space. And parsimony teaches us that out of all possible solutions, it's like regularization in mathematics. We want the simplest solution possible that does the job. And the list goes on. There are books on patterns, micro patterns, implementation patterns, and the question I'd like to ask is why this is so hard? Does being a good programmer essentially equate to learning millions of rules and applying them in various situations as those situations arise, or there is something else that can be done? And how do we consciously become better programmers? What do we do? And I hope I'll try and answer some of this in what comes. So Sun Tzu says, know your enemy and know yourself. And we're going to spend some time learning a bit about our enemy, and then the know yourself part will follow. So simplicity, the opposite of complexity, is frequently associated with beauty, clarity, purity. There's an interesting connection with truth here. Razor tells us that the simplest solution is usually the most likely. There are definitions that relate simplicity to perfection, harmony, and elegance. An interesting thing here, on par with the beauty exists in the eye of the observer, simplicity usually exists in the contemplating mind, and people can conceptualize things in different ways, and this is why it's hard to operate with simplicity. And John Heider has a view of this, and he says true simplicity is not easy. And the reasons I think it's not simplicity is not easy is because we need high-level view, and not everybody has the time to have a high-level view. To find the simplest possible solution that does the job, we need to know the whole space of solutions. And this is a simplicity of genius, someone who can capture the whole space and single out the ones that really shine. It's a hard problem. And of course, to make flexible systems, we need to know the space of problems. What problems are likely to be solved next? And predicting this is like predicting future is hard. And sometimes it's helpful to define a description framework before attempting to solve a problem, and this is where some of the complexity can be put into, and then the solution presents itself. This is the subject of domain-specific languages and a bit of an art. So before I come to a concrete definition that I'm going to use, I'm just going to show some famous people quotes on the subject. And Don Norman, user interfaces guru, written an interesting blog entry. I encourage you to. It's quite pragmatic, his point of view is basically people buy products that have more features, not less. And it's not because they prefer more complex products, it's because at the point of purchase, most of them don't know their needs. And therefore, to accommodate for that, they want the most complex product so that they make sure their needs are satisfied once they're familiar. And
for example, is a popular counter example. They have a very simple interface in their search engine, and it got popular just because of this.
Yeah, exactly. By that time, however, there were many search engines available, and people knew what they valued already. If you're buying something you've never ever interacted with, and you don't have time to learn the product, you will buy the one that seems like that has more features. That's his opinion, and I happen to agree with it in this context. So John Maedek's attention was drawn to this, and he retorted complexity is highly overrated too. And he does not contradict Don Norman. He says that complexity and simplicity are two sides of the coin, and one cannot be valued without the other. Sometimes we want complexity, and it's quite philosophical. He's a graphics designer. Then we have Einstein that cuts it through it and goes for the safe middle. The Einstein razor, yeah, and Antoine de Saint-Exupéry put it more poetically that perfection finally achieved, not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing to take away. And there are paradoxes as well, that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, which is true because we need to know the whole space of solutions. And Maeda writes that simplest way to achieve simplicity is to reduce thoughtfully. Well, thoughtful reduction to me is an exercise in high mental faculties, which is not a simple process, so there are paradoxes here. So the definition that I'm going to use is by Victor Vasily, that complexity is a measure of the resources expended by the system while interacting with a piece of software to perform a given task. This definition is quite general. It captures systems of a computer and programmer at the same time. So if it's computer, then the given task is computation. And if it's a programmer, it's the interaction with the program code in debugging testing. So I've looked up some definitions of complexity, and they fall into three categories. One of them is how many tokens there are in your program. The other one is how your program falls into parts. And the third one is how the information flows through your program. So the complexity measures are basically functions of those three things. And the creators of these complexity measures happen to agree that they are very difficult to compare and interpret. Sometimes at too low level, sometimes they don't take into account the domain-specific language side of the story. And sometimes we want contemplate in mind in the complexity measure as well, and it's really hard to get into. So function on the left, for instance, has a body twice as long as the function on the right. And both functions can accept three parameters and return a single one. So I'm showing this because I want to get a feel for what it is to see unknown code and guess complexity. So here, you're looking from a distance and you don't see the actual implementation. Well, you're told that the body of the function on the left is longer My question to the audience is, how much do you think the function on the left, how its complexity relates to the function on the right? Okay, we have one answer, can tell. Any more suggestions?
Are we doing the same thing?
We don't know.
In which case it's not relevant.
Pardon?
In which case it doesn't sound relevant.
Well, regardless of what they do, we still can rank them in complexity, right? So.
Okay, I'm relating complexity back to the problem that's being solved.
Right. Okay. So, but this is all the information you're given. Any other?
From the same programmer?
At the moment, it's local scope, right? You don't see anything else outside. So these are all it is of the information you're given. Right. Okay. So the shorter one seems simpler, and the can you tell by how much simpler it is? Is it twice as simple? Is it 3 times simple? Or?
One line.
Right. Okay. So.
But if that one line is a lambda.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm trying to ask is, if you were to consider all the space of all possible functions that you might meet in the code base, and then you average over all of them, what is the kind of feeling we get?
Usually the potential complexity is exponential in the size of abstract syntax tree, something like that.
Okay. So,
how it fits in my plate.
Right. Okay. Exactly. So another example: there are 2 identical functions, almost. One accepts 2 parameters, and the other one accepts 3 parameters. How the complexities relate?
2 parameters simple.
Right, 2 parameters simpler, but I'm more interested in how the complexity grows with these things. So if you were to express the complexity of the function on the right in terms of complexity of the function on the left, what would the relationship be?
1 even less, twice.
Twice. Okay. Okay. So the definition I've used for complexity here is the Henry and Kafouras metric, and is it a laser pointer? I think so. Okay, so they say that complexity, according to them, is proportional to the number of lines of code a program unit function subroutine procedure has, times the number of inputs it accepts, times number of outputs accepts squared. And I think there is a good rationale for that we live in a complex world where many entities interact with each other, and the way inputs can interact with outputs grows squarely, like a matrix, and the number of lines of code is a very good measure as well. So this is their complexity. So according to their measure of complexity, the function on the right is actually more than half more complex than the function on the left. And here, one is twice as complex as the other, if nothing else is said. So next example is taken from Ken Beck. And we have 2 functions. Which one do you prefer more and why? Okay, we have an opinion that function on the left is preferable. Why?
Because I understand what the second row means.
Okay.
And I don't know what the other function, even if it's called an increment count.
Okay.
I don't know.
Fair enough. Any other opinion?
Well, since count is a global variable here,
Yep.
I think the right solution is better because it at least encapsulates the fact that there is a global variable. Yeah, I agree with you, but for the context point of view, for me, it's just for me. The other one is.
Excuse me?
Yeah, I completely agree. If it was a local variable, I was very near to agree with you, but since
I'm happy to jump around. Yeah, that's fine.
I say it's better than less because count is a global variable in this example. If it was a local variable, I could probably agree with you.
Let's have a vote.
Okay. Now, what I want is more opinions because.
Yes, I prefer the function on the left because increment is a concept, is an abstract, an abstract concept. So increment whatever, not a single variable in any case it is. Increment means a completely different abstraction rather than the in one variable.
Anyone else?
Well, why don't your functions return?
Sorry?
Why don't they return something?
This
Please make your functions return things. Please check the return value.
Well, how do you normally explore a known code base, right? You first look, like if it's a C++ code base, you look at the header files, right? And you're not given you're given information first at the high level, and then you descend, right? So, I mean, here he doesn't clarify anything else, but there is some information over here to state the preference, I think. So, in his opinion, the function on the right is better, and the reason is that the naming of the entities here, the level of concreteness of this statement is way higher than the input and output, and so there is an inconsistency. But there are other opinions. So then there is this example, where level of concreteness is the same, but if anyone prefers flat, there you go. Hey, it works. It just
It does. It's pretty obvious. Right version is better because I don't know what penalty is.
Good answer. Actually, I don't mind playing around. So, yeah.
Well, I would say it's pretty obvious that the left one is better because calling tells something, and increment count tells almost nothing because you don't know what it counts or why they increment it.
Can you tell me what the English meaning of poly is? Because we both have absolutely no idea.
I'm just looking it up.
It means accumulate.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay.
Couldn't it be from the point of view from programmers, we would like the increment count, and people who work with numbers would like telling.
To me, tally implies that there are more than one input. So if you have more than one operation to do an input.
Okay. Great. I think. Hold on.
I would tally because somebody might change the implementation of increment count later down the line so that it doesn't actually increment count. And those two different.
Very good. Thank you very much. So the last opinion happens to agree with Kent Beck's. And there is an inconsistency in naming on the right, because input and output are named after what they do, and increment count is named after an implementation. So there is a discrepancy here, whereas tally is a better name in this context. So we have two classes. They implement add, process, and delete, and the other one implements add, process, and remove. I don't mind, actually. So it keeps me. Is it yours?
Well, I think add and remove is a better match than add and delete.
Why is that?
Just because of language.
Okay. Yeah. So another opinion was from the gentleman in blue shirt. The counterpart of add is remove. Am I correct?
The counterpart delete create.
Yeah, okay. Well, the counterpart of delete is create. And I had a discussion with someone else before, and we arrived at create and destroy as good counterparts. So, but you're both right. There is one more opinion.
I was going to say that remove is transitive, so you would have an object. So you remove something from something, whereas you just delete something, it doesn't take another option.
Very good. And
well, the problem is to start from the beginning and give a semiological definition of each verb, because every word have a different meaning in any different context. So delete or remove sound similar, but they must be specifically adapted to each context. Otherwise, if you use a word from a different dictionary, from a different rhetorical meaning, this can have a completely different meaning.
Yep.
So usually called the meaning part.
Yeah, so I think the correct answer was already stated, according to Ken Beck anyway. So there is a symmetry in naming, and delete implies complete destruction of the object, which add does not have. Add does not have a connotation with creation, and therefore add and remove are better counterparts. There are flame wars online about delete versus remove, so you're welcome to. Now 3 pieces of code are shown. Actually, how am I doing on time? I mean, keep this if... right, okay, so any opinions? Which one do you prefer and why? I'm going to take a few because I need to make sure we're moving the right rate. So, any?
The second one because it's the shortest, or almost the shortest, and even if an exception happens, it will close the file again. It even works with PyPy.
Anyone else? Anyone else?
Second is the most Pythonic.
Right, second is the most Pythonic, an opinion. So I don't happen to have a strong opinion on this, but there is complexity can be explicit and implicit, and the bottom one tells exactly what is happening, whereas this one you need to know with statement to actually know what it does.
You need to know right.
Yeah.
They are both parts of the language.
Yeah, so it's an evolution, but most people, for instance, learn the first one, right, when they learn Python, and then they realize it doesn't actually guarantee that the file handler is going to be returned to the operating system, and sometimes it can fail if it's executed often. So, and then with statement was introduced to. But my point here is that this operation, the complexity was just shuffled around. It didn't go anywhere. It wasn't created or removed. It's just some statement, the top statement doesn't deal with it at all. The bottom one is very explicit about what it does, and the middle one.
The bottom one has another problem. It shouldn't be exact. It should be finally.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Very good. So next. Okay, so the first and why?
Shortest.
Okay, so the first is preferred because it's shortest. It's also more Pythonic. I mean, the least comprehensives were borrowed from Haskell.
Yeah.
Pardon? Okay, so it's expressing things more mathematically. It's more readable as well.
There's 10 odd numbers in the first 20 instances.
Well, we're getting into philosophy land here, I think. I would say that the first one is more declarative than the other one. because at the bottom we actually state explicitly how we're going to iterate through this sequence, whereas the top one does not have this. And the data in declarative form is more amenable to parsing in the future in different ways. So I'm showing one mathematical example here because there is what I want is not to get in time. We don't have time to get into details how it works. But these two, which one do you prefer more without actually knowing what it does, just by reading it?
Yeah, both a bit ugly.
Okay.
The bottom one at least is formatted.
The bottom one is?
Formatted.
Okay.
Got a layout, so the other one doesn't seem to have. One has more of that.
I don't get it completely, but I think the second one is slow because it is a pen tool does not fit into the language concept. Right.
Okay. So second one, well, this is, I mean, they might compile down to the same thing. We don't know anything about implementation. Any other opinions? What?
It just looks more readable.
Okay, second one is more readable to someone.
Yeah, I find that expression inside the append to the second expression kind of really hard to
right.
get around with the triple bracket.
Okay.
Or quadruple bracket.
So the complexity of some expressions in the bottom is seems higher. The top one is more functional than the bottom one. And if you look at, here we have few entities like I and L that change their meaning throughout the iteration. And so to actually understand what it does, you need to step through it. Whereas there is an interesting thing here. Some of the functionality was factored out in advanced function, which can be tested separately. It got a name, so we can understand a little bit about what it does. And then this statement is a meetup that does the work identical to the work that is done here, and then this is just the post-processing to format the result slightly nicer. So functional, I think we sort of got it here, but the bottom, there were some opinions from people who didn't know anything about Mathematica syntax, that the bottom feels more complex. So, and finally, a real-life example. There is the red-black trees. Anyone heard about red-black trees? Yeah. So self-balancing data structure, and AA trees is just like red-black trees, but slightly different. And Arnie Anderson is the creator of AA trees, and he writes that AVL trees, red-black trees, SDDK trees, weight-balanced trees, half-balanced trees, and k-neighbor trees. None of them has become the structure of choice among programmers, as they are all cumbersome to implement. And so he writes that in terms of code simplicity, our algorithms compare favorably. And what I'm trying to say here, that the researchers are now evaluating computational complexity, space complexity, and code complexity at the same time to arrive at the most simple algorithms. And this is a great example, I think. So what he did, he packaged all the functionality away into two basic building blocks, the split and skew, and these are two operations here. What I want to do, I don't want to explain how it works. I just want to communicate how simple his algorithms are. And I mean, split, for instance, takes a single parameter, and then, according to some logic, it does a left rotation, whereas skew operation accepts a single parameter, and according to some logic, it does a right rotation. So there's sort of anti-symmetric, but not quite. And if you look at the balance tree visualized, when these operations are applied, they are opposites of each other. But in the implementation land, they are not quite. This is why I also chose different names that are not antonyms. And then, if you look at rotate right implementation, it does some bookkeeping. If you ignore the parent pointers here, it's just 3 lines. It accepts again a single parameter, does some rewiring, and so still not very much going on. And the right rotation is truly beautiful. This I want to show that it's truly beautiful. This mirror image, left and right, are named as mirror image of each other, and they are, in fact, if you just look at the, they are truly symmetric. So I think this is beautiful. And then he writes about deletion operation. He says deletion on these data structures is a complete nightmare. It is cumbersome implement even without balancing. And we show how to simplify deletion. And then this is delete operation in these implementations. There is cut. Oh, it does cut. So there is some complexity there for parameters. Then it does rewire, and then it does some bookkeeping again. So complexity essentially was put into cut and rewire. Now, what is cut operation? This is an industrial strength code, so it is a bit optimized. The initial cut operation was actually on one flight, but then he revisited his deletion, and he decided, oh, if we, instead of doing three-way comparison, if we actually do this infrequent assignment over here, V2R, so at the expense of doing this, we don't actually have to compare for equality here. We can deal with the less than the key that is passed, and the equality and greater than are dealt here. So
somehow a fan of single letter variable name?
Well,
actually, this small L is a bit dangerous.
Yeah.
You could also a 1.
I take your point. It's a question of style. There is actually a nice comment describing all those things, and then once you read it, it makes sense. And I think here we go for structure. So from distance, it's structured better. And then so the function rewire. I think this one depended on rebalance after cut, and rebalance after cut is just a few skews and splits, and a bit of logic there. So what I want to contrast it with is the STL port implementation of the red-black tree, and I'm just going to switch quickly here. So I'm going to show the header essentially. In the header, it just invokes another function from the implementation, and I think it's called rebalance for arrays. So rebalance for arrays. I'm going to increase the font slightly here so that it is possible to compare. Is this fair? Is this fair? 5? Yeah, probably. So, so I'm going to count the number of pages here. So there's the delete operation in red-black trees. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 pages. This is the delete operation. And if I zoom out, you'll see that there isn't actually much structure to it. It's just a blob. So for someone who wants to get into this, it uses slightly longer names, but it doesn't make it more penetrable. I don't think. So summary of what I said is there is no good measure of complexity.
It's safe to say that in the standard template library, probably they deal about strong security with respect to exception or other stuff. I don't know if...
This code essentially copies all the STL guarantees. So it provides the same strong guarantees about exception safety. And it's one-to-one. The original code that he published does not contain any parent pointer management, but if you know certain map implementations in STL, they require parent pointers, so we added those, and so they are very comparable in this respect. So the summary here, no good measure. Values are simplicity, flexibility, and communication, and consistency and symmetry really help to get into an unknown code base, and we should write our code with future readers in mind. Then complexity can be perceived explicit and implied, and we love functional style and declarative style of programming. So how much time do I have? Right. Is it fair to extend? Because we have some questions from the audience already.
Yes.
5 more minutes. Okay. So I talked about knowing the enemy part, and the other half of this talk, albeit a shorter half, I'll devote to knowing yourself part. So Don Pink writes a lot about extrinsic and intrinsic motivators, and there are two kinds of thinking. Some of them can be accelerated if certain motivators are present. Others can't, and tasks that require broad focus, i.e. something of creative nature, usually require completely different motivators. And he found that carrots and sticks are very good motivators for tasks with very narrow focus, like mechanical tasks, and tasks that appeal to higher mental faculties. They actually, the productivity goes down as you increase the reward. So Bill Spolsky writes about it a lot as well, and he says that people will do more for free than they will do for money. And Dan singles out 3 drives: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. He explains them in great detail, but I'll just run here quickly. So autonomy is the ability to choose what to work on. Usually, if people have that, they are much more productive. Then mastery is the ability, while working, to gain complete understanding of something that is complex. And purpose, the overarching theme of this of your work. There should be a purpose to what you do, and if you have that, you usually get much further. And I would like to add the fourth one to this. Tony Robbins writes that emotion is a very strong, powerful drive, and he believes that if you can get right feeling, we can get through anything. And so I encourage you to experiment with what drives you most, and get enough sleep. It's like a loan shark taking some time today in light of paying tomorrow. I'm not saying it's threefold, like if you have slept 7 out of 8 hours today, he'll pay 13 tomorrow. It's not like that. You'll have to sleep a bit more, but what you're really paying in, you're paying in lack of creativity, diminished morale, and stubbornness, and other unpleasantness. So getting enough sleep is important. Then the internet view us as an industry of addicts as far as caffeine is concerned. And have anyone heard about withdrawal reversal before? Withdrawal reversal. So it's there is an interesting paper floating around that basically states that there is no the boost that you receive, the user receives having had some caffeine, essentially on the time scale of equilibration. It's essentially reversal of the negative effects of the withdrawal. So initially you have your performance, right, and then as you start drinking coffee, you get into this cycle where the tips of performance are actually touching the performance that you had before. So actually,
I have to review my life.
well, I've been a very heavy coffee drinker, and then I've read a few articles. If anyone is interested, talk to me later. I'll give you some cool reps. So, lastly, it's very important to distinguish between fast time and slow time. And I'm going to read what David Levy thinks on the subject. Thinking is a slow time activity. It can only speed up some aspects of it. We've lost sight of one half of the equation of thinking. When fast and slow time meet, fast time wins. Naturally, we will always tend to do the most urgent tasks first. In this way, the slow and long-term activities lose out. In the age when the distinction between work and leisure are being erased, and efficiency seems to be the only value in economics, politics, and research, this is really bad news for things like far-sighted work. And I think John Haider sums it up really nicely, that allow real time for silent reflection, turn inward and digest what happened, let the senses rest and grow still. And so I encourage you to find some time for yourself during the day, half an hour or so, and find what environments work, and as our head of the department used to say, it's time to look back at what we've learned, draw a line, and reflect. And final pieces of advice that I've gathered is this is from an interesting article by Peter Norvig, where he mocks the box titled Learn A in B days, or Learn A in B hours even, where he says, well, he quotes Samuel Johnson, who says that excellence in any department is not to be purchased at a lesser price. The price is the labor of a lifetime. And his advice is that deliberate practice, not just doing it again and again, but challenging yourself with a task that is just beyond your current ability, trying it, analyzing your performance while and after doing it, and correcting any mistakes. Then repeat and repeat again. So, this is the final slide of my talk. And I would like to highlight that we don't have control over the time that we were given or the time we live in. And healthy diets get us only so far. And winning genetic lottery, well, it's a lottery, isn't it? It's probabilistically uninteresting. So as granddad of my wife said once to me, that death pours water of wisdom on dry sand. So if there is something that you really, really want to do, don't postpone it until tomorrow. Have a very good plan, execute it boldly and now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions? Well, in that case, I'll be available.
Maybe not a question, rather a remark. What I see rather often is that people confuse themselves, for example, by choosing names that are not appropriate. For example, if I tell a story that a food just crossed the bar, you maybe don't understand it, but if I tell that a chicken just crossed the road, you know what's happening. Yeah. And in code it's the same. They choose strange attribute names, and then they make a lot of mistakes because they don't understand what they just have done.
Very fair. Very fair. Any more comments? Well, in that case, I'll be available for the rest of the week. So if anyone wants to talk, please do. Thank you.
That's not on, it's already moving, and now...